The galaxy was vast, filled with countless worlds and civilizations, each with its own struggles and mysteries. Amidst the stars, there was one place where legends were born, the planet Aeloria. Aeloria was known for its beauty and power, but also for its dangers. The inhabitants lived under a shadow of fear, particularly from the Jiraxi, a race of ancient, powerful aliens whose warriors were as deadly as they were beautiful. They were feared across the galaxy, and their princess, Zephyra, was said to be the most dangerous of them all. Kale had heard the stories. He had heard the rumors, the whispered tales of her beauty, her power, and her ruthless nature. A human warrior of incredible skill, Kale was used to fighting battles, dealing with ruthless enemies, and surviving against the odds. But Aeloria was different. This was not a simple fight for survival. The stakes were higher. Here, he was not only an outsider but also a negotiator sent to deal with the Jiraxi. The reason for his visit was simple: peace. The Jiraxi had been in conflict with several other species, and the war was beginning to spill over into human territories. Kyle, with his reputation as both a skilled diplomat and a fearsome warrior, had been chosen to meet with Zephyra, the alien princess, and try to broker an agreement. But Kale was not just here for diplomacy. He was here to survive, and that meant understanding Zephyra in a way that others had not. When Kale first laid eyes on Zephyra, he understood immediately why people feared her. She was standing in the great hall of the Jiraxi palace, her presence dominating the space. Her long, flowing silver hair glinted in the dim light, and her sharp, angular features were both beautiful and intimidating. Her eyes, a deep shade of violet, seemed to see straight through him. She was everything the stories had described and more, but it wasn't just her beauty that struck him, it was her power. Kale could feel it in the air, like an electric charge, a force he had never encountered before. She was a princess, yes, but there was something more to her, something ancient and terrifying. Kale had heard whispers that the Jiraxi had the ability to transform into beings of unimaginable power, creatures that could obliterate entire armies with a single strike. Kale knew that many who had seen their final forms never survived to speak of it. He stood tall in front of her, his eyes unwavering. "Princess Zephyra," he said, his voice calm but firm, "I've come to speak of peace." She studied him for a long moment, her expression unreadable. The silence stretched between them, thick and heavy. Finally she spoke, her voice cold and smooth, like a blade. "Peace? You come to offer peace?" Her eyes narrowed. "Do you not know what the Jiraxi are capable of, human? Do you understand the power that flows through our veins? You may have heard the stories, but I assure you they are nothing compared to the truth." Kale nodded, his expression unchanged. "I know what you're capable of," he said. "I've heard the stories. But I believe peace is still possible. If we can find a way to understand each other, to negotiate, then maybe there's hope for something beyond war." Zephyra's lips curved into a small, almost imperceptible smile. "Hope? Humans always believe in hope," she said with a touch of mockery. "Tell me, warrior, what do you think you can offer that would make us stop our war?" Kyle didn't hesitate. "I can offer my word. I can offer my skills in battle. I can offer my people's commitment to peace. But above all, I offer the chance to stop the destruction, to stop the cycle of violence before it consumes us all." For a moment, Zephyra was silent, her violet eyes scanning Kale's face. It was hard to tell what she was thinking. She wasn't like the other aliens he had encountered, those who could be swayed with promises of power, money, or threats of violence. There was something deeper in her, something Kale couldn't quite put his finger on. Finally, she spoke, her voice quieter now, but still laced with danger. "No one survives seeing my final form," she said. "That is the curse of my people. We are born with power that no mortal can withstand. And you, human, you have no idea what you are about to face." Kale's heart skipped a beat, but his expression didn't change. He had heard the warning, and yet there was no fear in his eyes. He met her gaze, unflinching. "Then I'll die seeing you as you are." The words hung in the air, heavy and strange. Zephra's eyes widened for a fraction of a second, but then her expression returned to its usual cold mask. There was a long pause before she spoke again, her voice a low, dangerous whisper. "Do not mistake my words for a threat. I do not issue warnings lightly. The Jiraxi do not fear death, but we do fear what happens when our true forms are revealed. If you are foolish enough to push me to that point, you will not survive to regret it." Kale nodded once, his voice calm and steady. "Then let's make sure we don't reach that point. I'm here to find a way to prevent the war, not to cause more bloodshed." For the first time, a flicker of something that could have been respect or perhaps curiosity crossed Zephra's face. She studied him for a moment longer, her violet eyes intense. "Very well, Kale of Earth," she said finally. "We will discuss your offer, but know this. The Jiraxi do not make deals lightly. You may not leave here in one piece." Kyle didn't flinch. "I'll take my chances." The two of them stood there, locked in a moment of silence, the weight of their words hanging between them. Zephra's warning echoed in his mind, but he couldn't shake the feeling that there was something more to her, something he needed to understand if he was going to survive this mission. As Kale turned to leave, he couldn't help but glance back at Zephra. She was standing there, still watching him with those piercing eyes. And in that moment, Kale realized that this was no ordinary negotiation. This was going to be something far more dangerous than he had ever anticipated. The days following Kale's first meeting with Princess Zephra were filled with tension. As he walked through the grand corridors of the Jiraxi Palace, he couldn't help but notice how different this place felt from other alien worlds he had encountered. There was something ancient about it, a weight of history that hung in the air, almost suffocating. The walls were adorned with intricate carvings and alien symbols that Kale couldn't begin to decipher. The atmosphere was quiet, except for the soft echo of his footsteps. It was a place of power, silent, cold, and unwelcoming. Kale had been assigned to quarters deep within the palace. His room was large but sparse, with a bed made from strange, dark material that seemed to absorb light. The only decoration was a painting of a creature Kale couldn't identify, but its eyes, drawn in intricate detail, seemed to follow him wherever he went. He had been given food and drink, but they were unfamiliar. Still, he had not come here for comfort. He had come for peace. The days had blurred together as Kale focused on his mission. Every time he met with Zephra, the tension between them grew. She was difficult to read. One moment she would be calm, her voice cool and measured, offering insight into the politics of the galaxy. The next, her eyes would narrow, and the room would feel like a battlefield, the weight of her words almost unbearable. Kale knew that she was not just a princess. She was the leader of the Jiraxi people, a race known for their strength, intelligence, and ruthlessness. Despite the danger she posed, Kale found himself intrigued by her. It wasn't just her power or her beauty that drew him in, though both were undeniably striking. It was something deeper, something in her that seemed human. Perhaps that was what intrigued him most. Beneath the fierce warrior exterior, there was a vulnerability, a kind of sorrow that Kale couldn't shake. One evening, after a long day of discussions and failed attempts at reaching any sort of agreement, Kale found himself wandering the palace grounds, his mind racing. He needed answers. The more he learned about Zephra and her people, the more he realized that this wasn't just a war. It was a matter of survival. As he walked, he found himself drawn to a secluded courtyard, far from the main areas of the palace. The air here was cooler, the stars more visible through the clear sky. The courtyard was filled with strange alien plants that seemed to glow faintly in the darkness. In the center stood a large fountain, its water still and reflecting the starlight. Kale stopped and gazed at it, trying to clear his thoughts. He had learned little about the Jiraxi's history, and even less about Zephra herself. He needed to know more. Just as he turned to leave, a voice stopped him. "You wander the palace grounds like a lost soul," Zephra said, her tone both amused and sharp. She stepped out of the shadows, her violet eyes glowing softly in the moonlight. The moonlight caught her silver hair, giving her an almost ethereal appearance. She wore a simple dark robe that contrasted with the complex armor Kale had seen, her wear in battle. Even in this calm moment, she exuded an undeniable aura of power. Kale didn't move, though his pulse quickened at her sudden appearance. "I'm just thinking," he said, his voice steady. "I've been trying to understand your people, your history. I feel like I'm missing something." Zephyra tilted her head slightly, studying him with a hint of curiosity. "You think you can understand?" "The Jiraxi?" she asked, her voice almost mocking. "You are human, Kale. Your people are young, unlike mine. We've lived for centuries, and our history is not one that can be easily understood." Kyle didn't respond immediately. Instead, he took a step closer, his eyes focused on her. "You say your people have lived for centuries, but you don't act like you want to live forever." Yo. The days after Kale's conversation with Zephyra were filled with uncertainty. The tension between them remained, but it had shifted. The mystery of her true form loomed over every conversation they had, hanging in the air like a storm cloud, waiting to break. Kyle's mission had become more complex than he had imagined. It wasn't just about diplomacy anymore. It was about survival. His, hers, and perhaps the entire galaxy's. The Jiraxi, though a powerful and ancient race, were now divided. A faction of Jiraxi traders had joined forces with an unknown power, spreading chaos and destruction across the galaxy. The war between the Jiraxi and other species had escalated beyond what anyone had expected, and Kale had been sent here not just to make peace but to stop this rising threat before it was too late. Kale had spent the last few days studying the maps of the galaxy, preparing for his next move. He sat in the war room of the Jiraxi Palace, his eyes fixed on the holographic display in front of him. The galaxy was a vast, dangerous place, and the map showed every war zone, every conflict. The light from the display flickered in the dimly lit room, casting long shadows on the walls. The door opened and Zephyra entered, her presence commanding the space. She looked as regal as ever, though there was a tension in her posture, a quiet storm brewing behind her calm exterior. She nodded at Kale, her expression unreadable. "Have you made any progress?" she asked, her voice steady, but Kale could hear the edge of impatience beneath her words. Kale nodded, not taking his eyes off the map. "The Jiraxi traders are scattered across several systems, but they've been careful, using guerrilla tactics and hiding in neutral space. Whoever is behind this, they're smart. They know how to avoid detection." Zephyra crossed her arms and stood beside him, her eyes scanning the map. "Do you know who they are? Who's leading them?" Kyle shook his head. "Not yet. But we do know. They're after something important. The Jiraxi have been losing ground. If this keeps up, it could trigger an all-out war across the galaxy." Zephyra's eyes narrowed. "And the humans? Will you help us fight?" Kyle hesitated. "That's why I'm here, isn't it? But we can't fight this war without understanding what we're up against. I'm not sure anyone can win if we don't work together. I need your help, Zephyra. I need to know everything you can tell me about the Jiraxi and these traitors." Zephyra turned away, her gaze drifting toward the large windows that overlooked the vast expanse of space. She didn't speak for a moment, her fingers twitching at her sides as if battling an internal struggle. Finally, she spoke, her voice soft but filled with a weight Kale had not heard before. "You don't know what the Jiraxi were before all this, before we became a weapon, before we were corrupted by our own power." Kyle looked at her, his heart beating faster. "What do you mean?" Zephyra's voice grew distant as she spoke, as though she were remembering something from long ago. "We were once the guardians of the galaxy. The Jiraxi were created to protect this galaxy, to bring order to the chaos, but we were corrupted by our own strength. Over time, we became conquerors instead of protectors. We turned on each other, consumed by our need for power. Our final forms became a curse, something we could not control. We were gods, and yet we could not save ourselves from destruction." She paused, her eyes flashing with a mix of sorrow and anger. The traitors you speak of, they are those who remember what we were. They want to return to that power. They want to take control of the galaxy again, and they will stop at nothing to do it. Kyle absorbed her words, his mind racing. So they're not just rebels, they're trying to reclaim the power the Jiraxi once had? Zephyr nodded. Yes, and they're being manipulated by a dark force, someone who knows how to control them, how to use their weaknesses against them. I don't know who it is, but I fear that if we don't stop them soon, the galaxy will fall. Kyle's eyes narrowed. I'm not going to let that happen. We need a plan, and we need it fast. Zephyr turned back to face him, her expression hardening. You're right, but this isn't going to be easy. The traitors are powerful, and they have the backing of something dark. If we're going to stop them, we'll need every ally we can find. Kyle nodded. I'll contact the humans and the other races. If we work together, we can defeat them, but we need to move quickly. Zephyr hesitated before speaking again, her voice quiet. There's more, Kyle. The Jiraxi are not the only ones in danger. The traitors have found a way to unlock an ancient weapon, something even more dangerous than our final forms. If they activate it, it will destroy everything. Kyle's heart skipped a beat. A weapon? Zephyr nodded, her eyes shadowed with fear. Yes. An ancient weapon hidden deep within the galaxy. The Jiraxi were the keepers of it, but when the war began, we lost control. The traitors are trying to awaken it. If they succeed, it will be the end of everything. Kale felt a cold chill run down his spine. How do we stop it? Zephyr turned to face him fully, her eyes meeting his with a sense of urgency. We need to find it first. The weapon is hidden in a place that is nearly impossible to reach. But I know where it is. I can lead you there. Kale's thoughts were racing. Then let's go. We don't have much time. Zephyr's gaze softened slightly, but only for a moment. I'm not sure you fully understand, Kale. This isn't just a mission. If we fail, it will be the end of the galaxy. There's no turning back once we start. Kale nodded, his resolve hardening. I understand. And I'm ready. The two of them stood there in silence, the weight of their decision hanging between them. The fate of the galaxy now rested on their shoulders. Kyle knew that this mission would test every ounce of his strength, his will, and his courage. But it was a risk he had to take. Zephyr looked at him one last time, her expression unreadable. Then we'll begin tomorrow. Prepare yourself, Kyle. This won't be easy. Kyle nodded. I'm ready. Let's save the galaxy. The day had come. Kyle stood on the edge of the Jiraxi Palace balcony, his eyes scanning the horizon. The calm of the palace was a stark contrast to the storm brewing just beyond the gates. Zephyr had promised to lead him to the ancient weapon, but they had to prepare first. The traitors and their dark allies were already on the move, and the galaxy was on the brink of war. Kale could feel it in his bones. The battle ahead would not be won easily. As Kale looked out into the distance, he saw the darkening skies above the battlefield. Ships, each a testament to the Jiraxi's advanced technology, moved in formation above them, waiting for the inevitable clash. In the distance, Kale could make out the flashes of gunfire and explosions as the fighting escalated. The battle had already begun, and they were not ready. Zephyr stepped beside him, her presence almost magnetic. Her violet eyes scanned the battlefield, with the calm of someone who had seen this before. But there was a flicker of something darker in her gaze. She didn't speak at first, but Kyle could feel the weight of her thoughts pressing down on him. We can't delay any longer, she said quietly. The traitors will not stop until they have the weapon. And if they do, it's not just the Jiraxi who will fall. It will be everyone. Kale turned to face her, his expression hard. Then let's end this. I'm ready. She nodded, and they moved together toward the war room where the Jiraxi generals were waiting. The room was filled with the heavy silence of tension, and Kyle could see the fear in the eyes of the officers, the worry that had settled into their bones. The Jiraxi, despite their power, had never faced an enemy like this. The traitors were different, smarter, more strategic. They knew how to fight dirty, how to hit where it hurt the most. Zephyra addressed her generals. We have one chance to stop them. Our best forces will head to the location I've marked. Kyle and I will lead the mission to find and destroy the weapon. Once that is done, we can turn our focus to eliminating the traitors. One of the generals, a battle-hardened Xeraxi warrior named Joran, stepped forward. His broad shoulders and battle scars marked him as a veteran of countless wars. His voice was deep, but there was a hint of doubt in his words. Princess, with all due respect, he said, the location you've mentioned is far from here, and it's heavily guarded by the traitors. We don't know what we're walking into. The weapon could be a trap. Kyle stepped forward, his eyes meeting Joran's. If we don't act now, the galaxy will fall into chaos. We have no choice. We'll handle whatever comes our way. Zephyra turned her gaze to Kale, her expression unreadable. You heard him. We'll fight our way through. There's no turning back. The plan was set. Kale and Zephyra would travel to the weapon's hidden location, while the Xeraxi forces would hold off the traitors as best they could. It wasn't a perfect plan, but it was the best they had. And Kale knew that the key to victory was not just fighting the traitors, but understanding them. Understanding the ancient weapon that could destroy everything. The journey was long, the tension in the air thick as they boarded one of the Xeraxi warships, a sleek and deadly vessel that cut through the stars like a blade. Kyle and Zephyra stood, side by side on the bridge, the lights of the galaxy flashing outside the window. The crew moved with quiet efficiency, preparing for the battle ahead. Kale could feel Zephyra's unease. Though she said nothing, she was a warrior, a leader, but she was also carrying the burden of an ancient race's sins on her shoulders. She was fighting not just for the galaxy, but for herself and her people. As the ship made its way to the hidden loca, the silence in the chamber was deafening as Kale and Zephyra stood before the ancient weapon. It was unlike anything Kale had ever seen. Massive, pulsing with energy, and surrounded by alien technology that hummed with an eerie, unnatural power. The walls were covered in strange symbols that seemed to shift and change as if alive, whispering secrets in a language Kale couldn't begin to understand. The weapon itself was housed in a large, cylindrical structure, its core glowing with a deep, unsettling light. The air felt thick with its energy, and Kale could almost taste the danger in the atmosphere. He could feel the heat radiating from it, and the power thrumming through the ground beneath his feet. It was clear that the weapon was more than just a tool of destruction. It was a force of nature, something that could change the entire fabric of the galaxy if unleashed. Kale turned to Zephyra, who stood beside him, her eyes fixed on the weapon, with an intensity that made Kale uneasy. Her face was hard, her jaw clenched as she took in the sight before them. She looked as if she were bracing herself for something. This is it, she said, her voice low, almost a whisper. The weapon that could end everything. I should have never allowed it to exist. Kyle watched her closely. You didn't create it, Zephyra. You were only a part of a long history, and now we have the chance to stop it. Zephyra didn't respond. At first. She just stood there, her expression unreadable. Then, after a long pause, she spoke again. You don't understand, Kale. The weapon was designed to prevent our people from ever going to war with each other again. But it's not just a weapon. It's a part of our legacy, our curse. If we destroy it, we erase that part of us. And if we don't, we risk losing everything. Kale stepped closer to her, his hand on her shoulder. We can't let fear control us. The weapon is a danger, and it has to be destroyed. There's no other way. Zephyra looked at him, her eyes softening slightly. I know. But I've lived with this knowledge for so long. I've watched my people struggle with their power, and now we're on the edge of losing it all. The weight of her words hung in the air between them, and for a moment, Kale felt the full weight of the responsibility on his shoulders. He had come to Aloria with a mission, but he had never expected the cost would be this high. It wasn't just about saving the galaxy. It was about saving Zephyra from the darkness that threatened to consume her and her people. We'll do it, together, Kale said, his voice firm. We'll destroy the weapon and we'll end this cycle. You won't have to carry this burden anymore. Zephyra nodded slowly, but Kale could see the hesitation in her eyes. She was still struggling, still carrying the weight of her people's history on her shoulders. Kale understood that. She had always been a leader, a protector. But in that moment, he realized that she had also been a prisoner of her own legacy. As they moved closer to the weapon, the hum of the machine grew louder and the air seemed to vibrate with power. They had no time to waste. Kyle knew they had to act quickly before the traitors could stop them. Zephyra stepped forward, her hand outstretched toward the weapon. The energy in the room seemed to respond to her presence, swirling around her, as if it recognized her. For a brief moment, Kyle saw something in her eyes, a flicker of fear, a trace of doubt. But then, she took a deep breath and placed her hand on the weapon's core. The moment her fingers made contact, the entire room trembled. The symbols on the walls began to glow and the weapon's energy intensified, radiating out in waves that shook the ground beneath them. The hum grew louder, more powerful, until it felt like the very air itself was vibrating with the force of the weapon. Kale stepped back, his heart pounding in his chest. He could feel the power in the air, could feel the weapon's hunger, its need to be unleashed. He looked at Zephyra, whose face was now strained with effort as she struggled to control the power coursing through her. It was as if the weapon was calling to her, urging her to unlock its full potential. Kale could see the battle she was fighting. The weapon was feeding on her, pulling her into its grasp. Zephyra, Kale shouted, reaching out to her. You have to fight it. But Zephyra didn't respond. She was completely focused on the weapon, her face twisted in concentration. Kale's heart raced as he watched her struggle, realizing just how dangerous the situation had become. The weapon was trying to take control of her, and if she couldn't hold on, it would consume them both. Please, Zephyra, Kyle called out, again, his voice desperate. You have to let it go. You can't control it. For a moment, there was no response. The weapon's energy pulsed more fiercely, and Kale could feel the temperature rising. Sweat dripped down his face as he fought to stay focused. He knew they didn't have much time. Then, just when Kale thought it was too late, Zephyra's voice cut through the chaos. I can't, she cried, her voice filled with anguish. It's too powerful. Kale took a deep breath, his eyes never leaving her. He stepped forward, his hand on her arm. You can. You're stronger than this. You've always been. Zephyra's eyes flickered with doubt, but Kale didn't let go. He stepped closer, his words steady and firm. You've been carrying this burden for so long, Zephyra. It's time to let it go. You don't have to do this alone. We're in this together. Her eyes met his, and for the first time, Kale saw something in her eyes that he hadn't seen before. Trust. She took a shaky breath and slowly pulled her hand away from the weapon's core. The energy in the room began to fade, the hum of the machine slowing to a quiet buzz. But just as Kale thought they had succeeded, the weapon's core flared one last time, its power surging out in a violent shockwave. Kale was thrown backward, his body slamming into the wall as the room around them began to collapse. The ceiling cracked, and debris rained down, but Kale barely felt the pain. His mind was focused solely on Zephyra. When the dust cleared, Kale pushed himself to his feet and looked around. The room was in ruins, but Zephyra was standing at the center, her body shaking but still intact. Her eyes met his, and for the first time there was a sense of relief in them. We did it, she whispered, her voice barely audible over the sound of the crumbling chamber. Kyle moved toward her, his heart racing. You did it, he corrected, reaching out to steady her. We did it together. Zephyra looked up at him, her eyes filled with gratitude. But there was something else there too. Something deeper, something that had been building between them since they first met. In that moment, Kyle realized that the bond they had forged wasn't just about survival or duty. It was something more, something powerful. Zephyr took a deep breath and let it out slowly. "Thank you, Kale," she said softly. I don't know what I would have done without you." Kyle smiled, brushing a lock of her silver hair from her face. "You don't have to worry about that. I'm not going anywhere." For the first time in a long time, Zephyr allowed herself to relax, leaning into Kyle's touch. She had fought her entire life to protect her people, but in that moment she realized that she didn't have to fight alone anymore. With Kale by her side, she had found something she had long thought lost: hope. And as they stood together, amidst the ruins of the weapon they had destroyed, Kale knew that this battle was far from over. But for the first time he was certain that they would face whatever came next, together. The silence that followed the destruction of the weapon was almost unbearable. The air, once thick with energy and power, was now still. The walls of the chamber had collapsed, leaving nothing but rubble. The ground was cracked, the ceiling shattered, and debris scattered around them. It was clear that the battle had not been easy, but in the end Kale and Zephyr had succeeded. Kale stood amidst the wreckage, looking at Zephyr. Her silver hair, once perfectly styled, was now tousled and dirty. Her expression was one of exhaustion, but her eyes, those piercing violet eyes, shone with something else now: peace. For the first time in years, Zephyr seemed to be free of the weight that had burdened her. The burden of her people's past, the fear of her own power, and the curse of the weapon had all been lifted. She turned to Kale, her gaze softening as she took in the sight of him standing before her. The tension in the air between them had shifted. No longer was it filled with uncertainty and fear. Now it was filled with the quiet understanding of two people who had fought for something greater than themselves. "We did it," Zephyr said quietly, her voice filled with awe and disbelief. Kale nodded, a small smile forming on his lips. "Yeah, we did." He looked around the room, taking in the destruction, the ruins of what had once been a terrifying weapon. "The galaxy's safe, for now." Zephyr walked slowly toward him, her movements hesitant as if she were still processing what had just happened. "But at what cost?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Kyle's smile faded as he stepped toward her, his eyes meeting hers. "There's always a cost," he said, "but we did what had to be done." For a moment neither of them spoke. The weight of the situation, of everything they had just gone through, hung in the air, but it was no longer oppressive. Instead, it was a moment of quiet reflection, a moment where they could simply be together, knowing that the future was uncertain but filled with possibility. "Where do we go from here?" Zephyr asked after a long silence. She looked out at the ruins of the chamber, as if trying to find the answer in the destruction. "We've destroyed the weapon, but the war isn't over. There are still traitors out there, still factions,